One evening, after an especially enjoyable date, I came home to find Abigail slouched on the couch. A half-empty bottle of wine sat on the table beside her. She lifted her gaze to meet mine, her eyes red and swollen, a trace of regret clouding her expression. Her familiar face, usually so confident, was now softened with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. Before I could process what I was seeing, she whispered, "Kenneth, I told him I couldn't. I wouldn't." My mind raced. Was this the moment she finally understood the pain her actions had caused me? Before I could piece together her cryptic words, fate seemed to intervene. The doorbell rang, shattering the fragile moment like glass. Abigail flinched, her gaze darting toward the door. I didn't need to wonder who was on the other side. I already knew. And there he was, Kenneth, standing smugly in the doorway with a bouquet of irises in his hands. Abigail mentioned she loved these, he said with a grin that made my blood boil. Thought I'd surprise us both. His cluelessness, his complete disregard for the wreckage he had left behind, would have been laughable if it didn't ignite a fire of rage within me. "That's thoughtful of you, Kenneth," I replied, taking the flowers from him. Their fragrance, which I once found pleasant, now felt thick and nauseating. I stepped aside, blocking his entrance with my body. "I'm just finishing up some work," I said, my tone calm but measured. "But come on in. How about a drink? Unless you have somewhere else to be." From the living room, Abigail's quiet sobs cut through the silence. Each one was a painful reminder of everything that had crumbled between us. Kenneth's smug demeanor faltered as he looked past me. I followed his gaze toward Abigail, tear-streaked and visibly shaken. Turning back to Kenneth, I locked eyes with him, my stare steady and deliberate. "Kenneth," I began, my voice low but firm, "we need to talk. About boundaries, about loyalty, about the cost of crossing certain lines." His expression shifted. I could see the realization dawning on him. He had miscalculated. He'd thought I would sit back and accept this, to be some passive, oblivious fool. But tonight, he would meet someone entirely different. The bouquet slipped from my grip, petals scattering across the floor in a messy, bruised tangle. The perfect metaphor for everything he had shattered. I led him into the living room. Abigail sat there, a silent witness to the unfolding scene. Her eyes flickered nervously between the two of us as she attempted to speak. "Randy," she began, her voice weak. I raised a hand to silence her. This wasn't her moment to explain or justify. This was my moment to take back control of a life that had spiraled far beyond my grasp. Kenneth shifted uncomfortably. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by visible unease. His eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. "Maybe this isn't the best time," he stammered. I cut him off, my voice cold and firm. "I'll decide the timing." I pointed to the armchairs by the fireplace, a symbolic space between us that felt like a chasm. Kenneth, visibly pale, sank into one. His movements were stiff, his eyes flickering between me and Abigail. I took the seat opposite him, ensuring he had nowhere else to look. Abigail remained standing to the side, a spectator to the twisted theater of our confrontation. She had helped set this in motion. "Randy," she whispered, her voice catching, "don't cry. Don't do what Abigail did." I stared at her unblinking, my gaze steady. "What did Abigail do?" I asked, my voice unwavering. I had to fight for what I had once valued, to defend my pride. I had to demand the respect of a man who thought he could just insert himself into our lives without consequence. The room was thick with tension, every word and glance adding fuel to the fire. Kenneth stammered, trying to form a defense, but I cut him off with a single icy glare. This wasn't a conversation, a back and forth where he could justify himself. This was a reckoning. I made myself crystal clear. "Kenneth," I said, my voice heavy with contempt, "with your flowers, your endless intrusions, your absolute disregard for our marriage. You saw a chance and took it, without a trace of shame. My words hung in the air, thick with accusation. Kenneth's gaze fell to his lap, his face pale. I couldn't tell if his reaction stemmed from embarrassment or fear, and honestly, I didn't care. What happens next depends on you, I continued. Think carefully before you say another word. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Look, Randy, he began, his voice shaking. I didn't mean for any of this. Abigail, she's just special. We just connected. That's all. I scoffed. You call this mess a connection? I let the word hang in the air, heavy and biting. Sneaking around behind my back? Taking advantage of her vulnerability? This isn't some fantasy romance, Kenneth. This is reality, and reality comes with consequences. Kenneth's posture crumpled. He stared at the floor, his face drained of color. A dark satisfaction bubbled within me as I watched him finally grasp the weight of his actions. From the fireplace, Abigail's voice cut through, barely above a whisper. Randy, please. It's not what you think. It was just a fling. It didn't mean anything. Her words only stoked the fire inside me. A fling? I repeated, my voice rising. Is that what this is to you, Abigail? Years together. Promises made, and now it's nothing more than a fling. She flinched, tears welling in her eyes. But I felt no sympathy. I turned back to Kenneth, who sat frozen in place. Get out, I said, my voice low but firm. Get out of my house and out of our lives. This is your one and only warning. If you so much as try to contact Abigail again, if I even hear your name, I'll make sure you regret every second you spent here. Is that clear? He didn't need to be told twice. Scrambling to his feet, he muttered apologies as he backed away. His face was pale, full of fear. I followed him to the door, my gaze cold and unyielding. He nearly tripped in his rush to leave, desperate to escape the suffocating tension in the room. When the door slammed shut, I turned back to Abigail. She stood there, pale and trembling. As for you, I said sharply, we are not even close to being done. With Kenneth gone, the silence was deafening. Abigail's uneven breathing and the ticking of the hallway clock were the only sounds. Whatever illusion we'd had of a normal life was gone. There were no fragile bonds left to save us. Just two strangers standing amidst the rubble of broken promises. Randy, please, she whispered. I raised my hand to silence her. I didn't want apologies, excuses, or pleas. I wasn't even sure forgiveness was something I could give. Don't bother, Abigail, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. We were long past explanations. She recoiled, fresh tears spilling from her eyes. There was a time when those tears would have been enough to soften me, but now they only fueled my anger. Abigail, I asked coldly, did you really think I wouldn't find out? Or did you simply not care? She shook her head, her once neat hair now a disheveled mess, making her look almost childlike and vulnerable. But instead of softening me, it only deepened my resentment. No, Randy, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. It just happened, like it was some kind of accident. No, Abigail, you made choices. Choices that destroyed everything. Her composure cracked, and she broke down in front of me, trembling as tears flowed freely, the weight of it all hitting her. I stood there for a moment, unmoved. Abigail, do you want to know what happens next? I asked, my voice sharp and cold. Her eyes widened, fear clouding her gaze. We're going to play a little game, I said, my tone final. If you want forgiveness, if you even want a chance at salvaging this, you'll play by my rules. No questions, no arguments. I've made my point. She trembled, her voice barely a whisper. What kind of game is this, Randy? A game for me to know and for you to find out, I replied. The man who would once have done anything to make her happy, who had cherished her above all, was gone. That man had been replaced by someone colder, a stranger, shaped by the betrayal she had dealt me. Forgiveness and reconciliation were luxuries I could no longer afford. The first move was simple. I called a realtor and quietly put our house on the market. The next morning, when Abigail saw the for sale sign planted on our perfectly manicured lawn, her facade shattered. "Randy, what are you doing?" she demanded, panic rising in her voice. "We can't sell this house. Where will we go?" I raised an eyebrow. "You forfeited the right to that when you decided you needed another man." Her frantic protests and desperate pleas fell on deaf ears. Selling the house was just the beginning. Next, I began to dismantle the life we had built together. I opened a separate bank account, redirected my paycheck, and systematically severed our financial ties. Abigail, accustomed to the security of our shared life, quickly noticed the shift. "You can't just cut me off, Randy," she yelled, her voice rising in indignation. "It's my money, too." "Is it?" I replied coolly. Last I checked, loyalty and trust weren't line items on our joint bank statements. Her attempts to bargain slid off me like water on stone. The next stage came with the arrival of the divorce papers. I had my lawyer deliver them to Abigail's office with an icy precision, instructing him to make the process as unyielding as possible. Abigail called me in tears, trying to negotiate, but I hung up without a word. On some days, I spoke with my lawyer, ensuring the divorce was as brutal as I could make it. The fallout rippled through our social circle. Friends who had once shared meals and laughter with us now found it difficult to navigate the uncomfortable reality of our broken relationship. Invitations dwindled, replaced by awkward silences and sidelong glances. Abigail, once the envy of our circle, a successful realtor with a charming husband and a seemingly perfect life, was now isolated, drowning in pity and judgment. Yet she didn't back down. Quietly, she hired an aggressive lawyer known for securing the best settlements from unsuspecting spouses. But I was ready. Years of meticulously managing our finances became my weapon. I had every hidden asset, every questionable expense, meticulously documented. The things Abigail had tried to conceal were laid bare in court, each piece a testament to her deceit. The legal battle dragged on for what felt like an eternity, brutal, unyielding, a war of attrition fought through courtrooms and endless filings. Friends began to notice the coldness in my demeanor, the precision with which I was dismantling our life. They urged me to seek healing, to find forgiveness. Their advice was meaningless. I wasn't interested in forgiveness or closure. My sole focus was on the game, and Abigail had unwillingly become its central player. The divorce wasn't just a legal dissolution. It was a statement, a stark reminder that betrayal comes with a cost. Some wounds, no matter how deep, never truly heal. The final court hearing felt surreal. Detached, we stood before the judge, physically close but with an unbridgeable chasm between us. The judge, sensing the palpable tension, spared us the usual lecture on fresh starts or reconciliation. A few swift strokes of his pen, a formal decree, and that was it. Our marriage, once the cornerstone of my life, reduced to a handful of signatures and legal jargon. As I turned to leave, her voice stopped me. "Randy, please wait." I paused, my hand hovering over the door handle, considering walking away without a word. Part of me craved the satisfaction of denying her this last request. But something deep inside me, the faintest trace of the man I used to be, compelled me to turn around. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes holding something I hadn't seen in a long time. Regret. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry, Randy," she said softly, her words raw and free from excuses. I looked at her, searching for a trace of the woman I had once loved. I searched her face for some remnant of the woman I once knew, the life we had built together. But all I saw was a stranger, someone shaped by choices I couldn't comprehend. "Sorry," I repeated, my voice steady and cold. "I know that doesn't erase everything. It doesn't fix the wreckage you left behind. I know it doesn't, she whispered, her voice trembling. I just wanted you to know I regret it. I was wrong, and I know it. Her words, free of the defensiveness and justifications that had defined so many of our past conversations, hit me differently. For a fleeting moment, I glimpsed the woman I had once loved, vulnerable, remorseful, and sincere. But the moment passed, swept away by the weight of everything that had come before. I did what I knew I had to. I turned and walked away. "Please, Randy, don't go," she called after me, her voice soft and pleading. Her words followed me like a ghost, a haunting echo of a love that no longer existed. I didn't look back. I couldn't. To look back would have been to reopen wounds that had only just begun to scar. Stepping into the sunlight outside, the warmth struck my face, sharp against the sterile cold of the courtroom. It was over, yet strangely, it felt like the real work, truly moving on, was only beginning. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. For the first time in months, maybe years, a weight lifted from my chest. A quiet sense of freedom settled over me, accompanied by an unexpected anticipation for whatever lay ahead. I didn't feel regret. Not for Abigail, not for the life we had left behind, and not even for the cold, calculated game I had played to its bitter end. I had survived her betrayal, emerging from the ashes of our marriage stronger, more determined, and certain of my own worth. The game, with all its harsh lessons and sharp victories, had been a trial by fire, a crucible that had forged me into someone who would never again be taken for a fool. As I walked forward, I allowed myself a small, contented smile. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ground, but its warmth promised new light. My future stretched out before me, uncertain but full of possibilities. The game was over, and in the end I had won, against the odds, against every doubt. As I stepped into Horizon, I knew one thing for sure. I had finally left the past behind. Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. Trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.